Hi everybody, I am going to talk about the phases of social casework. Social casework is one of the key basic methods of professional social work practice around the world. Helen Harris Perlman in 1957, in her books Social Casework, a problem-solving process, clearly emphasizes that working with individuals or casework is a process. This process has to enhance the person with a problem to utilize the available resources within oneself and in the environment around to solve the problem. The word process is very important in the understanding of casework. Helping individual or doing casework is not a one-time activity, but it is a process. This process has got various phases involved in it. Let me explain the most commonly used phases in social casework by different agencies and by different professionals. At the end of my talk, you will know the phases involved in social casework, understand the role of the social caseworker at each of these phases, and learn the tools and techniques used at each of these phases. The process of casework is a systematic professional method of helping individuals to cope with their problem. Traditionally, the casework process involves 5 key steps or phases. Let me first describe phase 1, also known as the initial phase or intake phase, which is marked by study or exploration of the person with problem. At this phase, a very quick and systematic study of the person with problem is done. In this phase, the worker learns more about the individual's environment and its relationship with the problem. The worker facilitates the person to present the problem. This phase focuses on getting the client to fully participate in the process of problem solving. This is a crucial stage because the client makes an important decision whether to accept or decline the services of the caseworker. Therefore, the initial contact needs to be productive and constructive in order to encourage the client to continue with the service. The caseworker has to be guided by the basic tenets of social casework and must show respect for the self-worth and dignity of the client. The worker's problem-solving capacities and self-affirmation is profoundly influenced by the expression of individuality and ambivalence. During this phase, the key task of the worker is to listen to the description of the problem as presented by the client. The worker has to listen to what the client says and also understand what he or she does not say. The worker must not only pay attention to the words the client uses, but must also identify the hidden meaning of these words. It is an opportunity for the caseworker to learn more about the client and his or her attitude to life. During this initial contact, it is important for the caseworker to convey to the client that the caseworker regards the client as a valuable person, respects his or her dignity, and considers his or her problems important and deserving careful attention. The caseworker should use the initial contact as an opportunity to win the client's trust and get him or her to place confidence in the caseworker's professional competence. This can happen only when the caseworker demonstrates acceptance of the client and a genuine interest in helping him or her deal with his or her problem. It is essential to maintain professionalism through the interaction, starting from greeting the client to bidding him or her goodbye, as this will help build trust. The caseworker must also help the client learn where he or she stands with respect to the problem. The initial phase of understanding the client involves three key activities. They are ascertaining the facts about the client, understanding how the problem and what is happening to the client, and deciding upon the means of intervention that the worker will provide. Let me mention the tools used during this phase. Professional interview with the client and people related to the problem. Records and documents pertaining to the client. Collateral contacts, which includes contacts other than the client or his immediate family, such as staff in school or hospital, employers, relatives, and neighbors. The second phase is known as multidimensional assessment. Assessment focuses on getting to know more about the client and his or her problem. The caseworker tries to gain a thorough understanding of the client and his or her problem. The client is encouraged to elaborate on the problem so that the caseworker is able to develop a better perspective and understanding of the problem. The caseworker concentrates on finding answers to three key questions. What is the problem? How did the problem occur? And how to solve it? As the casework intervention proceeds and more information is added, the initial impressions are either strengthened, modified, or rejected. Assessment is a circular process. It never stops during the casework intervention. It is important for the caseworker to know what to look for, what to disregard, and how to review the findings in the light of the emerging data. As the worker encourages a client to explore the problem, the meaning of the facts becomes clearer. The main tasks of the worker are to assess the nature of the problem, the causes, the precise definition and description of the problem, to assess the nature of the client, review the strengths and weaknesses, and understand how he or she is coping currently, to assess the nature of the person by establishing a causal relationship in order to understand the reasons for the given state of affairs, and to assess the nature of the assistance or help provided by the agency. The assessment should also examine the client's ability to solve problems. Thus, assessment refers to an analysis of strengths, capacities, limitations, motivation, and opportunities of the client. The result of assessment guides the worker in planning the intervention. Assessment does not result in categorization of individuals or in labeling of problems. It facilitates the worker to plan intervention strategies. The third phase is known as multidimensional intervention. This phase deals with the process of implementing the agreed upon strategy to bring changes in those situations which are considered to be problematic by the client. Interventions begin with the setting of goals as decided by the client and the caseworker. The ultimate goal is to reduce distress and improve the functioning of the client. It is important to look at the client's motivation, strengths, and how the situation can be modified or changed. Intervention could be at three levels. Intervention at client level by utilizing the client's strengths, family support and peer influence, intervention at agencies level by utilizing the resources available at the agency, and intervention at community level, which involves the use of community resources such as schools, employers and hospitals. The participatory skills of the client should be taken into account when deciding the intervention plan. The guiding principles during intervention are the right of the client to decide his or her own course of action and acceptance of the ability of the client to change. Social work relates to strengths rather than sickness or disorder. Limitations are handled and recognized realistically. There are two main categories of intervention, namely the direct and the indirect method. Both the methods are equally important during the intervention phases. Let me explain the direct methods. Direct methods involve intervention that takes place directly between the worker and the client. It helps the client to take constructive decisions, maintain an emotional balance, and reinforce attitudes favorable to growth and change. These are termed direct interventions as a caseworker exerts his or her influence directly on the client. Intervention strategies include counseling, therapeutic, interviewing, clarification, interpretation, and psychological treatment supportive techniques. Let me explain each of these strategies. Counseling is a rational way to help a client sort out the issues in his or her situation, to clarify problems and conflicts, to discuss the various options and make choices. Counseling involves a systematic procedure. Some important counseling techniques include reflective discussion, motivation, clarification, correcting perception, modeling, anticipatory guidance, role-playing, reality orientation, partialization, interpretation, universalization, and confrontation. Therapeutic interviewing focuses on asking in-depth questions to resolve the intra-psychic conflicts. Clarification deals with helping the client gain a better understanding of himself or herself, his or her environment, and the people with whom he or she is associated. It assists in building greater clarity to the client about the problem. In interpretation, the caseworker interprets the unrealistic ideas and strong emotions of the client. Psychological treatment aims at decreasing tension and guilt, increasing self-confidence, and enabling the client to express his feelings. Supportive techniques include acceptance, assurance, facilitation of expression of feelings, accrediting and building of self-confidence, and being with the person with the problem. Let me briefly mention about these techniques. Acceptance is a basic technique of helping and conveying through words and the overall behavior of the caseworker. It is also characterized by the way the worker demonstrates warmth and genuineness to the client. The way the worker listens to the client is important in creating a feeling of being accepted. One way to accept the person with the problem is to empathize rather than sympathize. Assurance is when the caseworker enables the client to understand that his or her feelings are not judged, and that the worker is not shocked to hear the client express feelings of hatred, jealousy, resentment, and anger. Facilitation of expression of feelings is a technique of helping the client to vent his or her feelings. Strong feelings that are bottled up can create blocks in thinking. In such cases, it is essential for the worker to help the client to express his or her feelings, and the worker acts as a prodder and prompter. Accrediting and building of self-confidence refers to the worker pointing out to the strengths and positive characteristics to the client and giving him or her due credit for the tasks performed. This helps a client build his or her confidence. Being with a person with problem is a technique that is essential when the person loses confidence or is weighed down with anxiety and is unable to make decisions or carry out his or her tasks. In such instances, the presence of the worker will serve as a support. Indirect methods of intervention in the casework process focus on helping the client emerge from the current problem by influencing his or her environment or through some monetary benefits that could be rendered within the scope of the agency of the worker. Let me now explain two indirect methods, namely environmental modification and administration of practical services. Environmental modification refers to attempts to correct or improve the situation in order to reduce strain and pressure. The emphasis here is on modifying the situation. This method is often referred to as an indirect method of intervention, as the focus is on the change of physical environment or an alteration of any of the social systems which may be essential for the better functioning of the client. For example, the client may be encouraged to join a recreational or other group so that he or she can relax and thereby function better. Administration of practical services is one of the oldest and best known of the casework methods of intervention. In this method, the worker helps the client to choose and to use a social resource or service provided by the agency. Often, the client knows what he or she wants, but does not know where or how to get it. The client is served in one's own agency or sent to another agency where he or she is best served. Providing material help, legal aid, medical care, and arranging for the camps are examples of practical services. The worker needs to have a thorough knowledge of community resources, use them selectively and economically. Let me describe the fourth phase, namely termination. Termination means the ending of a process that began when the social worker agreed to enter into the intervention process. The processes of study, assessment, and intervention do not continue forever. The worker and the client together understand and plan the termination. It is done at a stage when the client looks back with satisfaction on what has been accomplished. The worker takes initiative, outlines realistic goals, confirms the importance of what the client can do and is expected to do in resolving the problem. Termination, in other words, is a signal that the worker uses to confirm that the worker has confidence in the client's ability to learn to cope with situations and to grow. The role of the worker is of an enabler and also as a resource for the person with problem in the present situation. The final phase is evaluation. Evaluation focuses on understanding the outcomes of the casework intervention. The evaluation process will enhance the ability of the worker and the agency to render better professional services. The evaluation process is an essential element in the social casework process. It helps prevent an overlap of the services provided by the agency. The client needs to give his or her feedback about the process, which will assist the development of improved casework processes in the future. Case recordings are important tools which provide information about the casework proceedings and the efficiency of the services provided by the agency. Facts have to be gathered, organized, and recorded for the measurement of results. Recording along with the documentation are continuous and ongoing throughout all the phases of casework intervention. Let me sum up. The process of social casework has 5 phases. Phase 1 is the initial phase or the study phase. During this phase, the client presents his or her problem. The client decides whether to start the intervention or therapy. The caseworker collects all data relevant to the client and the problem. The interactions between the client and the caseworker are often most dynamic in this phase. The client and caseworker initiate a professional relationship founded in trust. Phase 2 is the assessment phase. Assessment is a fluid and dynamic process. It begins with a statement of the problem by the client. The client develops a clearer understanding of the problem during this phase. The intervention strategy is jointly evolved by the client and the caseworker during this phase. The goals of the intervention must be congruent with the needs of the client and the services available to the client. The caseworker must respect, support, and reinforce these goals. Phase 3 is the intervention phase. The intervention or treatment actually begins with the first contact between the client and the caseworker. The client has a right to decide his or her course of action. This principle must be kept in mind at all times during this phase. Intervention can be direct intervention or indirect intervention. Direct methods of intervention include counseling, therapeutic interviewing, clarification, interpretation, and psychological treatment, supportive techniques. Indirect methods of intervention include environment modification and administration of practical services. Phase 4 is a termination phase. Termination refers to the conclusion of a process that commenced when the caseworker agreed, initiate an interceptive process aimed at delivering services to the client. It occurs when the client is satisfied with the manner in which his or her problem was addressed and resolved. Phase 5 is the evaluation phase. This focuses on the process of attaching a value to the social work practice. It is a method of learning what the outcomes are. One of the key purposes of evaluation is to let the agency and the worker know if their efforts have brought fruitful results in the service. Caseworkers have to improve their own practice and the programs and services offered by the agency. Feedback from the client would enable them to do both and also understand the effectiveness of the existing services. Case recording and documentation are continuous and ongoing throughout all the phases of the casework intervention. Let me sign off now and hope to see you in another session. Thank you.